And you know what you can do if you're worried about remote work? Measure your metrics. Like set your metric for when you're in the office, set your metric for when you're out of the office. See which one works better. I can almost promise you that you'll do better with a flexible work environment than you will with one with people there.
Welcome to the Own Your Day podcast, powered by RescueTime, where we explore how team leaders can cut through distractions, create focus, and help their teams do their best work. If you're ready to help your team with more intention and less stress, let's dive in. Today, we're addressing a pressing issue for remote teams, the increasing pressure to return to the office. As more companies retract remote work policies, it's crucial for teams to demonstrate their effectiveness. Okay, well, I would like to welcome Brian Fioca to our very first podcast. Brian is one of the original founders of RescueTime, and we're just going to go ahead and dive into our issue. But Brian, would you like to just say hi and introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brian. I was one of the original founders of RescueTime 17 years ago, 2007, almost 18 years ago. And so, I've been thinking about this topic for a long time. I'm the last person that would maybe ever think to want to track their productivity. I'm just not that person. I'm not like a data nerd typically. But it turns out that, you make what you measure. And when we started this a long time ago, we were really annoyed by just sort of not having an understanding of where our time was going. And I think most people still have that problem. And it's been kind of a crazy journey this whole time. We've built a company that's helped millions of people, and I've got to be a part of it. And it's been amazing.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Let's dive into the war on remote work. As you know, there's been huge conversation on LinkedIn with just talking about going back to the office. Obviously, during COVID, many companies adopted remote work policies, but now those are being threatened and stripped away. And Brian, I just really wanted to know, do you have any perspective on this? And what are your thoughts about what people should do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It's funny because, I've been aware of remote work since, the beginning, right? So we started RescueTime in 2007, 2008. Around the same time, there's a company that we were friends with at the time, WordPress, who has a fully remote team. They have an office, but it's just for quarterly gatherings. The team comes to the office to just sort of meet up a couple times a year. And they don't really ever even have a culture of in-person, right? So they built their entire company culture across the globe completely remote. And that was inspiring to us. What was really interesting at the time was, as a small company, it's easier to find talent globally that wants to work for you that's really good, instead of sort of having to limit yourself geographically. So from the beginning, we saw that as an asset. And what's neat about having a company that measures productivity is you can actually have a sense of comfort for whether or not your team is actually, contributing, obviously without monitoring. But so we kind of embraced that from the beginning. Off and on, we had in-person offices, remote workforce. I think it's been fully remote again now for over 10 years. But all the time, there was always somebody who was remote. And so my thoughts on that are, it's always helped us. We've had a small, amazing team of people who are super talented, who don't necessarily live near each other, which isn't something that's easy to do, if you have an office. And then, the other thing is we designed the culture, and you can do this, where there are certain aspects of the way you run projects and the way you run meetings where you have it set up so that the remote people on the team, even if you're hybrid, it's easy for them to join, it's easy for them to contribute and to feel like a part of the process.
I do have a question though, because the biggest thing that I always hear with, bosses is, how do you figure out in regards to being productive or not? Right. With that flexibility that they have, I know, what if they have that flexibility to, put in the laundry real quick or doing dishes? How is it that you give comfort that, hey, they're still going to do their job to their fullest potential, even though that they have this flexibility to do that?
Yeah. I mean, okay. I have strong feelings about this, so I will try to sort of so like you hire people who are good, right? Like like a big part of this is your hiring process needs to be good and sane. And most people want to work and do things, and like especially in knowledge work, they enjoy making things and like being part of a team and like collaborating and delivering value to people, right? So if you do a good job of hiring, you've done most of the work there. And then the second thing is, okay, so it's funny because when we were at our interview at Y Combinator, I remember Paul Graham at the time saying, this could break the spell of the 40-hour work week. Like, it's like at big companies, people put their coats on their chairs and like they make it look like they're still there, even if they're going to run to a doctor's appointment or go get groceries or something like that. And like, he was like, I bet if you ran this in big companies, you would see that like most people don't work 8 hours a day. And that's true. And like, okay, what does that mean? Well, people do work 8 hours a day. I mean, there's a certain amount of focus work. We can talk about that, but like no normal, rational, like sane person who can do anything for any period of time can really do more than 4 or 5 hours of focus knowledge work a day. There's lots of studies about that. That's the whole, the famous author who talks about that all the time. I can't remember his name now, but yeah. So all that to say that whether or not you're in an office or at home, there's a certain amount of work that a person can do. There's a certain amount of work they can do at their computer. There's a certain amount of work they do while they're thinking about it, like walking around their neighborhood or driving into the office or taking a shower in the morning. And that's just sort of like all you can expect from a person, and whether or not they're doing it in a physical space with everybody around them being looked at, or whether they're doing it at their house, or whether they're thinking about it while they're picking up their kids, it doesn't really matter. Like what matters is, do we have realistic goals of delivering value to customers for our products, and can we get it done? And is everybody on the team contributing in the best possible way? I think a lot of the metrics for this sort of 8 hour day, 4 hour, 40-hour work week come from a time where people are working in factories, right? Like
Right,
we're not
right.
doing that. We're thinking about things. We're being creative. We're talking to people. And it's just a lot of this sort of mentality comes from a kind of like, I guess, insecurity of middle management of like, okay, who's going to be responsible for what happens if something goes wrong? And there's whole classes of people in big companies whose entire job is to sort of be responsible if stuff goes wrong, and they don't really trust that they have control over that when people aren't visible to them. And so I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And it takes me to our next segment where I'm kind of thinking about that thought of the guilt. Like I know like what you were talking about with 8 hours a day, but even with 8 hours a day, because if you're working on something or you're trying to get things done, there's no way that someone's working 8 hours. However, how is it that we could use, tools to show, hey, you were productive. You actually did put information towards this project. And with doing that, get over that guilt of, oh, I worked 8 hours, but I really don't feel like I accomplished something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Let me talk about that, because that became clear to us in the very earliest phases of Y Combinator. Okay. So we went through Y Combinator. Y Combinator is, I wouldn't say it's a pressure cooker, but it's a very intense time where every week you have dinner with all of your other batch mates and they're showing off some crazy amazing thing that they did that week, right? So and we all have a key metric that we're sort of aiming at, trying to like get to demo day and raise funding, right? So there's a lot of like, okay, how much can I work and not die in
Right.
that process? Not because I feel like I have to, but because it's just like literally you're out there like hunting your own food in the forest, right? So watching my time. So the thing about RescueTime is obviously it tracks the time you spend on different things. It can track flow, it can track focus, it can track productive work and distractive work. And so really quickly, what I saw was in the beginning of the week on Monday, I had like a really my productivity score was really high, and my output was I was on the computer for like a lot. And then by the end of the week, no matter how hard I tried, I kept just sort of like scalloping down. Like by Friday, I just like was going for more walks. I just like physically couldn't like mentally like focus very much anymore. And I'd be sort of fried. And so we actually showed that to some people at YC. I forget who it was that actually said something about it, but they were like, what if you just like took a break on Wednesday? And so I did. And then I measured the results, which you can do. And instead of it being this big scallop shape, it was much more sort of steady. Like I had a break on Wednesday and it was steady. And, I would work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And something about that like mental break just like kept me more steady, but also on average, more focused on the work that I wanted to get done and less on distractions. And so that was a big clue that there's something kind of wrong about the way we're doing things. I mean, I think everybody knows if you work like a really grueling work week by Friday, it's really hard to do anything. Right. So like,
Yeah.
so we would do things like, okay, let's move abstract things to like, we had like Meta Friday where we would like think about stuff that wasn't related to what we were trying to get done to sort of like help clear our heads, tricks like that. But all along the way, in our, 10 to 12 hour days at the computer sometimes, you would see that like 4 or 5 hours, even at peak, was all you could really do from a focus perspective. And I would later go on to measure that if you go past 5 hours of focus work a day for a period of time, you go into debt. So that was another thing we did really early on was we were trying to sort of like warn people, look, like if you do, like you're really pushing, and if you keep pushing, it's gonna bite you, and you're gonna have like a month where you're not gonna be able to hit your goals. So that's a lot of where this sort of telemetry around productivity comes from. Once you understand that, like you have a lot more flexibility and like you can set a goal of, okay, I want to have 3 or 4 or 5 hours of focused work per day. And the rest of the time you can structure however you want to. Or, sometimes I just stop. Like, okay, cool. I hit it at 2 p.m. I know if I go more, I'm going to be hurting myself. So I'm just going to like, it was a tight morning and I'm going to go do something else.
No, I absolutely love that. And just from what you were describing, can you expand a little bit more? Because you talked about the fact that you were able to look back at, your reports and things like that. Is this something that you have to track, or can you expand a little bit on just the automated time tracking aspect of it?
Right. So that was the big thing about our product, right? So I think we launched with our tagline being ridiculously easy time management. And it's true. I mean, like, no data entry. We had a rule where like nothing, initially you had to tag things manually, but pretty quickly we were able to kind of derive tags, and then we turned tags into categories. And so RescueTime, you download this app on your computer and it just sort of hangs out in the background, sees what's in focus, sees whether your computer is idle, looks at window titles and application names, and really kind of puts together a really good sense for, are you working sort of like in sort of like your finance Excel spreadsheet flow into like doing market research, or are you doing product development, switching between Figma and Cursor? And you get, it like has an understanding of which tools are for what types of things and which things are, more productive or more distracting based on you. Like, somebody who's doing marketing might be on sort of LinkedIn or Facebook or other places doing research or checking performance. And for them, that's considered, productive. And so the tool is just like designed to tailor for you and just kind of hang out in the background and like, let you know when you've sort of like hit your peak and focus and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, being able to track this, I want to talk a little bit about like your mental health. I know for me personally, I'll go and I'll be on, social media, TikTok or something, and I'll be like, oh, I only spent 20 minutes. But when I actually look at my time, I'm like, oh my goodness, how did I go in like a 2-hour loophole? How did this change how you worked? Did it make you feel better to know what you were actually doing versus when you were in the dark?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we started with really was really just kind of a script that ran on your computer to like, so it started because Tony and Joe and I were working at companies where we had daily stand-ups. And part of a daily stand-up is, what did you do? It's supposed to be, what did you do yesterday? What are you planning on doing today? What's blocking you? And nobody had a good answer for what they did yesterday. They're like, well, I think I worked on this, and I don't really know for how long. So the original idea was to sort of like just answer the question of what did I do yesterday? And what we found really quickly was what I did yesterday was like a lot of the times email, meetings, and like, a bunch of other random things, and then some work. And um, so especially when it comes to sort of like task switching and fragmentation, once we added, some switching metrics where it's like how many times did you switch in and out of email or chat? And once you could see, oh wow, I really did spend 30% of my day on email, or I spent like maybe an hour and a half catching up on industry news when maybe I should have like, changed those percentage allocations. It's really kind of about like awareness of how you're allocating which percentage of your job is sort of like happening. And once you have a sense for that, just like, measuring anything, your fitness abilities, right? Like if you're using Fitbit or something like that to measure your steps, you can mindfully decide to spend your time in different ways based on your goals.
So just to kind of wrap this up, I am curious in regards to what would be the benefit for a team or a company to have this automatic time tracking in the background, to just kind of help change the environment of their company.
Yeah, I mean, without even really having to sort of like get a lot of fine-grained detail about how your team is working, just the idea that, people make what they measure, is really powerful. Like, if people do this for health situations, for health insurance, where they like, they give everybody sort of fitness challenges or things like that. And it's sort of like that, where it's like, hey, let's like be accountable to ourselves. Let's try to like figure out, okay, you know what? It looks like we're spending all kinds of times in meetings. Like maybe we have fewer meetings, or maybe we move meetings to Fridays where like people aren't going to be sort of like broken out of their flow. That's a big thing too, is like some people are really good at working at certain times of day, and like having an understanding of that, especially if you're remote and distributed in different time zones, is really powerful. And you can sort of structure your company culture around making sure that you're not interrupting people's flow, making sure that you give them space to like be creative and like solve problems. And, I think of this as really just sort of like a helpful tool for the team to sort of like help them be aware of best practices for themselves, right? Like, and it's different for everybody. Like I tend to work differently in the morning than I do in the afternoon. And I can see that by looking at my data as like a mirror of how I work. And the more I'm aware of what works best for me, the better I am, if I'm working for somebody else to sort of meet my performance goals or that sort of thing. And I think that's like it's a big benefit for teams. It helps them perform better. And, you don't have to go look exactly at how they're doing it. You just know that they're making the most of their time and being the most efficient they can be.
Absolutely love that. Just like what you mentioned at the beginning of when you hire someone, that's like the most important thing. But then when you give them the tools to enhance their productivity and workday, at the end of the day, they're going to end up being better employees for you. And using a tool like RescueTime sounds like it would help them get closer to their goal than trying to manage, every hour that they're doing, trying to make sure that they have an understanding of what time of day and when they're able to get more focused will it be more beneficial to the company. Do you think that would be the
Yeah,
correct
I think that's
assessment?
really true. I mean, like, a lot of companies have, yearly performance metrics. And it's like, I want to spend more time on this. And I want to like improve, I want to like budget more times for running these programs, or I want to help out these teams. And like, this is a tool that can help people achieve their own internal, like personal performance goals just, by themselves. And in fact, like people who use it tend to be better workers, and they're more successful in their careers.
All right, Brian. So we talked about, productivity and how empowering employees to have access to how they're spending their time has just been really, really empowering. And I love the automated aspect of what we do, because no one has, you're already doing your day job. No one has time to think about, tracking what you're doing. So I love how we do this in the background. Just touching base on something that you said, I love the historical data aspect of it, because you'll be able to look back at, last year's quarter one to see how long it took someone to complete a project. And then that way it'll allow you to plan for the future better. So I think that's invaluable with the company.
It totally is. And, this is also really great for remote teams too, right? So, our thing with remote teams is everybody works differently. Let's just be honest about that. Like some
Yes.
people are better at just like grinding out for 4 hours. Some people like to sort of like do something for a little while and like go for a walk and come back. And to try to like have real insight into like what makes somebody more productive than another person, it's basically possible. We're all individuals. And if we're remote, what's great about remote is you now have the flexibility to sort of like work in the way that makes sense for you. So with timesheets actually do a great job of just accounting for that, right? Like there's a period of time where a work day exists. And timesheets like will track the time that you spend like working on different projects during that day, whether you're focused or not. And that's like ultimately kind of like what we're aiming for is, we need to get our allocations of hours correctly, optimized for delivering goals, regardless of where we are in the world or like what our workday looks like. And I think this is the way to do that.
Absolutely love that because like you said, it's perfect for remote workers because my immediate thought is that we're tracking projects, not the time of day someone is working. It's when it's most productive for them. And at the end of the day, isn't that the goal for a company? It shouldn't matter what time of day they work or how often they work, as long as they are able to get their project time in, right?
Exactly. And like at the end of the day, we're all accountable to, our deliverables and what we agreed to do for our jobs. Like that's real.
Yes.
And, like you could track that by like, having cameras at everybody's desks or tracking whether their mouse is moving or not during certain hours of the day. I would argue that just like is like crippling. It makes people want to quit and like doesn't really lead to any kind of creative solution for anything at all. Or you could track like actual allocated time towards projects and like whether or not we're hitting our milestones and goals. And like that's the real way of doing it, I think.
I want to touch on something that I know a lot of employees might be sitting there thinking, like, this sounds all, fine and dandy. However, I don't want to feel like Big Brother is watching over me. Like, what would
Yeah.
you say to that?
I think I I empathize. So there's a couple things. I like want to say this again. I'm not the person who would ever want to track any detail about. I'm just a chaotic person in general. Like that's why I started a company. Is like it's really hard for me to work at like any regular amount of time. Like anything predictable is not me. And so like I'm just constantly afraid of like somebody finding that out. Like, what is this guy doing? I get my stuff done though, right? And like that's
Right.
what matters. I've always done that. And I need to work differently to do that. And so I mean, we are designing this in for people like me. Like I don't really necessarily want anybody to know how I like do my stuff. I just want to show that I can get it done in a way that's like, insanely great. And so this tool is designed for people like me who don't want to be tracked like in that way, but they want to be able to shine, right? Like in the early days, I had friends to be like, hey, can I run RescueTime on my computer so I can send a report to my boss to prove to him that I'm not screwing off? Like that was interesting. Like we don't like that necessarily, because that's like way too much information to be sharing with a person's boss, I think. But like this is like a way of doing that. It's like, look, I am doing my job. Not only that, but like, you know, like I'm amazing at it. And sometimes people need to be heard in that way.
100%. That was like a huge thing for me working here because similar to you, like you said, I get my stuff done, but it may not look like everyone else. We're all adults. We've all been hired for a job. And I feel like that's okay. Like it's important for, the people that not only hired us and invested in us, just to make sure that, hey, we're focusing on the things that we're supposed to be focusing on.
Yeah. And I get it. Like it's scary for managers to have a team of people that they don't really get to see in person all the time, right? Like
Yeah.
there's something like let's be transparent about that. That's it's scary, and like if you let that go, you're accountable to it.
Right.
But this is different. Like this is a way that like it's like this can be a gift, right? Not just to you, but your team, where it's like, look, let's like trust people to be adults and to work the way that works for them. And then like, we can all like see how we're doing together. We can see, oh wow, it looks like so and so actually like is probably close to burnout based on these numbers. Like they need a break. Like that's what I want this tool to show, not like, who's not pulling their weight, right? Like
Right.
that's not, I don't want to live in that kind of like world.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think it brings back humanity, right? People have been talking about AI and being afraid, but honestly, if we're going to be truthful, like you said, the 8-hour workday is kind of archaic, and we're treating people as if they're machines if we're expecting them to work like that. And I love how you said, oh, let's not make it where oh, they should get fired because they're slacking. It's more of, hey, I think they're reaching burnout and let's do some readjusting. And I think that's really important to change that perspective.
I think realistically, that's so people who become underperformers for whatever reason tend to because of other reasons, right? They're not inspired, they're not challenged, or they are being worked to the bone and you can't see it. And like this is a way to like be able to sort of diagnose those things if used correctly as a tool to sort of like keep people operating at peak performance, right? Like, if you have a team of athletes, they you have to sort of like you can't run them too hard, that sort of thing, or you have to sort of like cross train them in different things. And so like this kind of visibility lets you be that sort of strategic with teams in a way that like helps everybody get the most out of what they're doing in a way that like feels good instead of
Yes.
just like hurts.
No, I absolutely love that. When I think about, some sales calls and stuff, I know one thing that I always tell people, our tool should be only to enhance your business. When you want to bring someone on, it starts from the beginning. You should hire someone that you trust, and our tool is only going to help you make them a better employee.
Yeah, it's totally true. And like, for people that are remote workers out there that want to stay remote, talk about this product, like talk about this as an idea. It's like, hey, look, like, we will we'll like use this tool to sort of like show that we're working towards our goals in a way that like, is collaborative and like makes everybody feel like accountable and responsible to the shared mission without giving up freedom, right? Like
Yes.
freedom is the value of remote work. And freedom creates productivity, like it creates creativity, it creates new, exciting, inventive ideas, and it actually gives people stamina to do stuff that they don't like to do either, right? Like literally, sometimes I go down to the park when I know I have to grind out on something that I hate, and I just bring my computer out of the park and I sit in front of the water and I stare at it and I just like I do that so much better than if I was like chained to a desk and all.
Yes. So, I know this is something that I don't think that you were aware of yet, but recently we added targets for projects. And what's really, really awesome about it is that I feel that, like what you were saying, it's kind of gamifying the experience, but collectively making it where everyone's on the same team and working towards a project goal. But I think that as we continue to get more people using it, we're definitely going to continue to add more features that are only going to enhance businesses moving forward.
I'm really excited about that. Like, so I'm a big fan of the focus goal. That's something we added a few years ago. Based on, we used to have, focus score and productivity score. But, in the early days, I would set a 4-hour focused work goal. And sometimes I would go up to 5. But like, I knew if I hit 4 when I was, this was like Y Combinator days, like 4 hours of focus work is a lot. Like, I think the average for like large corporations is like 2 to 3 for most people in our database. And that's just a lot of times you have a lot more overhead with meetings and sorts of things. So if like focus work is valuable and you can only do it for so long. So I would set a goal, and when I hit it, I would know that like whatever time of day it was, I could feel good. Like, okay, cool, I did it for the day. And sometimes that would be like 6 o'clock at night. Sometimes it would be like 2 p.m. And But like if I kept up with that goal, I knew that I was on track, just like a fitness tracker. Like this is where I need to be for where I want to hit my goals, and I feel good about that. And I would encourage people to think about like, okay, well, when you hit your target, if you have that dialed in right, like take a break, like give people
Right.
like have a celebration, like we did it, like have a happy hour or whatever, a virtual team building event, something like that. I think that could be a really good sort of like, motivating sort of like rhythm for people to get into.
We talked about at the beginning about, the 8-hour workday and how that's not realistic. And I know that there's studies when people are in person that they have, bathroom breaks and water cooler breaks and such. So they're really not working 8 hours. How do we break the barrier to let people know, like you said, the 3-hour focus work, like that's major. Like that's the goal that you're looking for. It's not the 8 hours.
I think there's so much research out there. There's so much studies about. There's like books you can buy. I mean, like this is just like a real thing. And you know what? I mean, let's be honest. We live in a data-driven world. Like if you want to make an impact, like you set a metric and you measure against it, you have to pick the metric that you care about, that works, that makes sense for you. But that's really kind of what we're all doing here is like, we need to move a number. That's what productivity is like, we're here, we want to be there. How do we do that? So focus work is a really good, very well studied metric for that we can give people. And then once you layer on top of that, project tracking and targets, it's just another extension of like, this is a metric. And you know what you can do if you're worried about remote work, measure your metrics. Like set your metric for when you're in the office, set your metric for when you're out of the office. See which one works better. I can almost promise you that you'll do better with a flexible work environment than you will with one with people there. But that's like, if you want to pitch back to your boss, like, look, like return to office is bad. Here's why. I can prove it to you. This is exactly how you do it. It's numbers.
Absolutely love that though, because I didn't think about that until you said that, especially for people that are gradually getting into that or doing hybrid roles. It's important for them to track their time in both settings so then that way they can have data to show. Okay, well, that concludes our very first episode. Ryan, thank you so much for joining with us. I look forward to many more in the future.
This was so fun. I'm so happy that this happened, and it's an honor to be on the very first one.
Perfect. All right, awesome. See you guys next time.